Imagine attending a party where the main entertainment is watching your most dignified friends completely lose their minds. They're stripping off their clothes, dancing uncontrollably, getting into fistfights, or sobbing hysterically while the audience roars with laughter. The kicker: they're all doing this voluntarily, and they paid good money for the privilege. Welcome to the laughing gas parties of the 1800s, where getting high on nitrous oxide wasn't just legal, it was considered educational entertainment for the wealthy and sophisticated. Today, we're diving into one of history's most bizarre social phenomena, when inhaling mind-altering gas at public demonstrations was as normal as going to the theater. Scientists were dealing it, doctors were recommending it, high society was huffing it, and somehow everyone thought this was perfectly respectable entertainment. What started as a scientific experiment became a full-blown drug craze that swept across Europe and America, creating scenes of public intoxication that would make modern festival goers blush. But before we explore how Victorian ladies and gentlemen turned getting high into a social event, make sure to hit that like button if you're fascinated by the stranger sides of history. And subscribe with notifications on, because the past is full of stories that prove our ancestors were far wilder than we ever imagined. Trust me, after learning about these nitrous oxide parties, you'll never think of the Victorians as prudes again. The story begins in 1772 when Joseph Priestley, an English chemist and minister, first synthesized nitrous oxide. He called it phlogisticated nitrous air, because 18th century chemistry had ridiculous names for everything. Priestley noticed that mice in jars of this gas seemed unusually active before dying, which probably should have been a warning sign. But Priestley, being a good scientist, decided someone should try breathing it. That someone, thankfully, wasn't him. Enter Humphrey Davyys, a brilliant young chemist who would later invent the safety lamp for miners. In 1799, at just 21 years old, Davyys was working at the Pneumatic Institution in Bristol, a medical facility that treated diseases with various gases, because apparently Victorian medicine thought inhaling random chemicals was the solution to everything. Davyys decided to experiment with nitrous oxide on the most readily available test subject, himself. His first experience was revelatory. Davyys wrote in his journal, "A thrilling extending from the chest to the extremities was almost immediately produced. I felt a sense of tangible extension highly pleasurable in every limb. My visible impressions were dazzling and apparently magnified. I heard distinctly every sound in the room and was perfectly aware of my situation. My emotions were enthusiastic and sublime. In other words, he got absolutely blazed and loved every second of it." But Davyys didn't stop there. Like any good scientist of his era, he immediately started getting all his friends high. He invited poets, writers, and fellow scientists to the Pneumatic Institution for experiments. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote Kubla Khan, allegedly under the influence of opium, tried nitrous and declared it gave him the most unmingled pleasure. Robert Southey, another poet, said breathing the gas felt like the atmosphere of the highest of all possible heavens. Word spread quickly through British high society. If famous poets and scientists were doing it, it must be sophisticated, right? Soon, Davyys was hosting regular nitrous oxide parties at the institution. The setup was almost ritualistic. Participants would sit in a circle while Davyys administered the gas through a silk bag connected to a wooden mouthpiece. They'd inhale deeply, hold it, and then the show would begin. The effects were unpredictable and often hilarious. One respectable gentleman stripped down to his underwear and tried to fight everyone in the room. A distinguished lady began opera singing at the top of her lungs, despite having no musical training. A famous doctor became convinced he could fly and had to be restrained from jumping out a window. Another participant spent an hour laughing at his own hands, and everyone else would watch, take notes, and applaud like this was legitimate scientific research. By 1800, these philosophical gatherings, as they were euphemistically called, had become the hottest ticket in town. The Royal Institution in London, one of Britain's most prestigious scientific bodies, held public demonstrations where audiences could watch volunteers inhale nitrous oxide. Tickets sold out weeks in advance. Ladies wore their finest gowns, gentlemen their best coats, all to watch people get high and act ridiculous in the name of science. The demonstrations followed a peculiar etiquette. First, The lecturer would explain the chemical properties of nitrous oxide in dry scientific terms. Then came the experimental phase. Volunteers from the audience would be invited on stage. To maintain respectability, women volunteers were rare and always chaperoned. The volunteer would inhale the gas while the lecturer narrated their symptoms to the audience like a nature documentary. The results ranged from hilarious to disturbing. One account from 1801 describes a banker who, after inhaling nitrous, began removing his clothes while reciting Shakespeare. When the effects wore off minutes later, he had no memory of his performance and was mortified to find himself half naked in front of London's elite. Another volunteer, a stern magistrate, spent 5 minutes giggling uncontrollably while trying to arrest invisible criminals. Medical professionals were split on these demonstrations. Some doctors praised nitrous oxide as a miracle cure for depression, consumption, and palsy. They opened pneumatic hospitals, where patients paid enormous sums to inhale various gases. Others warned it could cause moral degradation and insanity. The Lancet, Britain's leading medical journal, published heated debates about whether getting high in public was medically beneficial or socially corrupting. The parties spread to America with even more enthusiasm. In 1844, a showman named Gardner Colton arrived in Hartford, Connecticut, advertising a grand exhibition of the effects produced by inhaling nitrous oxide, exhilarating or laughing gas. The poster promised that 8 strong men would be on hand to restrain anyone who became violent, and assured ladies that no improper influence would occur. Tickets cost 25 cents, about $8 today. The American shows were even wilder than their British counterparts. Colton would bring 40 gallons of gas in a huge rubber bag, enough to intoxicate dozens of volunteers. The evening would begin respectably, with a lecture on chemistry. Then Colton would call for volunteers, preferably gentlemen of the first respectability. What followed was controlled chaos. At one show in Boston, a Harvard professor inhaled the gas and immediately began conducting an invisible orchestra with such passion that he fell off the stage. A minister started preaching a sermon about talking horses. A lawyer cross-examined an empty chair for 20 minutes. The audience loved it. Newspapers called it the most genteel entertainment ever presented to the public. But the most significant laughing gas demonstration happened on December 10, 1844, in Hartford. A local dentist named Horace Wells attended Colton's show. During the demonstration, a volunteer named Samuel Cooley inhaled the gas, went berserk, and ran directly into a wooden bench, badly cutting his leg. But Cooley felt no pain until the gas wore off. Wells immediately realized the implications. Nitrous oxide could be used for painless surgery. The next day, Wells had Colton administer nitrous to him while another dentist pulled his tooth. He felt nothing. Wells had discovered anesthesia, one of medicine's greatest breakthroughs. Ironically, the discovery that would save millions from surgical agony came from watching people get high for entertainment. But the medical establishment wasn't ready. When Wells demonstrated his discovery at Massachusetts General Hospital, the patient woke up mid-procedure screaming. Wells was labeled a fraud. He became depressed, addicted to chloroform, and eventually committed suicide. Meanwhile, laughing gas parties continued for decades, with no one realizing they were playing with one of medicine's most important tools. The parties became increasingly elaborate. By the 1820s, entrepreneurs built special gas rooms, venues designed specifically for nitrous oxide parties. The Adelphi Theatre in London had a laughing gas evening every Tuesday. The Liverpool Gas Light Company offered private parties where they'd bring the gas directly to your home. Rich families would hire gas professors to administer nitrous at birthday parties and weddings. The fashion for gas parties created an entire industry. Special inhaling apparatus became luxury items: silver mouthpieces, silk bags embroidered with chemical formulas, elegant glass containers. The Wedgwood Company made commemorative plates depicting famous gas demonstrations. There were nitrous oxide poems, songs, even a brief-lived magazine called The Laughing Philosopher, dedicated to gas party culture. Women's participation was particularly controversial. Medical journals warned that nitrous oxide could cause hysteria and moral looseness in females. Some doctors claimed it could damage their reproductive organs or cause them to become unnaturally bold. but society ladies ignored the warnings. Lady Henrietta Cole wrote in her diary, "The gas gives such freedom. For a few moments one can forget the suffocating propriety expected of us." The working class wanted in on the fun, too. Street vendors began selling laughing gas at fairs and markets for a penny a breath. Of course, their gas was often just air mixed with alcohol vapor or worse. These bootleg operations led to numerous injuries and even deaths. In 1826, a London fair gas vendor accidentally used hydrogen sulfide instead of nitrous oxide, poisoning dozens of customers. The police didn't know how to handle it. Nitrous oxide wasn't illegal. It was used in legitimate medical treatments, but the public intoxication it caused was undeniable. In 1834, the mayor of Birmingham tried to ban public gas demonstrations after a riot broke out when intoxicated volunteers began fighting over who got the next turn. The ban was overturned when prominent scientists argued it violated academic freedom. Churches were horrified. Sermons denounced gas parties as Satan's whisper and the devil's breath. One minister claimed nitrous oxide was literally the forbidden fruit from Eden, now in gaseous form. Pamphlets warned that breathing the gas could allow demons to possess you during your moment of mental weakness. Some congregations held prayer meetings specifically to save souls corrupted by laughing gas. The parties reached peak absurdity in the 1840s. The Duke of Wellington allegedly held a gas party where military officers reenacted famous battles while high. Lord Byron's friends claimed he wrote poetry under nitrous influence, though none of it survived. Probably for good reason. There were rumors Queen Victoria herself tried it, though the palace vehemently denied it. Medical students were the worst offenders. They had unlimited access to pure nitrous oxide and zero supervision. Oxford and Cambridge had to implement rules after students began showing up to lectures obviously intoxicated from gas. One Cambridge don wrote, "Half my students spend more time with their heads in gas bags than in books." Medical school parties became legendary for their debauchery, all technically in the name of scientific research. The inevitable backlash came in the 1850s. A series of high-profile accidents turned public opinion. A young aristocrat suffered permanent brain damage after inhaling contaminated gas. A pregnant society lady miscarried after a particularly intense session. Most shocking was the case of Lord Pemberton's son, who became addicted to nitrous, inhaling it daily until he suffered complete mental collapse. But what really killed the laughing gas party wasn't moral outrage. It was respectability. As nitrous oxide became accepted as legitimate anesthesia in the 1860s, getting high on it seemed suddenly childish. The same substance that allowed painless surgery couldn't also be party entertainment. Medical boards began restricting access. What had been a society sensation became a medical tool, and the parties moved underground. Some historians argue these parties served an important purpose. Victorian society was incredibly repressive, especially for women and the upper classes. The gas parties provided a socially acceptable excuse to let loose, to be silly, to break the rigid social codes that governed every aspect of life. Under the influence of nitrous, a lady could laugh loudly, a gentleman could cry, and everyone could blame the gas. The parties also advanced science, albeit accidentally. The detailed observations of nitrous effects contributed to early neurology and psychology. Watching how different people reacted to the same substance helped scientists understand that consciousness and personality were chemically influenced. Some credit these observations with inspiring early theories about the unconscious mind. By the 1870s, public laughing gas parties were essentially dead in respectable society. They lingered on in traveling shows and working-class entertainment, but the cultural moment had passed. The substance that had been the height of sophisticated entertainment became associated with cheap thrills and dental visits. But the legacy lived on in unexpected ways. The bohemian art movements of the late 1800s explicitly referenced gas party culture. The aesthetic movement's emphasis on art for art's sake and experiencing pure sensation echoed the philosophical arguments for recreational nitrous use. Oscar Wilde allegedly quipped that laughing gas was the only honest thing about Victorian society. It admitted we all wanted to lose control. The most ironic legacy? Today, nitrous oxide is still used recreationally, sold in small canisters meant for whipped cream dispensers. Modern users call it whippets or hippie crack, completely unaware they're continuing a tradition that started in the most prestigious scientific institutions of the 19th century. The gas that Victorian ladies inhaled in silk-draped parlors is the same one people huff at music festivals. Looking back, the laughing gas parties reveal something profound about human nature. Give us any substance that alters consciousness, and we'll find a way to turn it into entertainment. Dress it up in scientific respectability, add some social ritual, and even the most buttoned-up society will embrace getting high in public. The Victorians just did it with more style and better documentation. So next time someone tells you the Victorians were all propriety and repression, remind them of the laughing gas parties. Picture London's elite, in their finest clothes, paying good money to watch their peers lose their minds on nitrous oxide. Remember that anesthesia was discovered at what was essentially a drug party. And consider that maybe, just maybe, every generation finds its own respectable way to get absolutely wasted. If you found this tale of Victorian drug parties as mind-blowing as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. Because trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to our ancestors' wild behavior. The past isn't what you think it was. It's so much stranger.